the fact that we are having this debate and that we are discussing the consequences, in my opinion, speaks well for the club and its supporters.
It's so easy to hold up a black sheet of paper when we do the TIFO in the stadium for the Holocaust Remembrance Day. It was an impressive one, and again this season. It's so easy to hold that up, but the question is, how do we actually? What does it mean in everyday's life?
Well, here it is, the first ever two-part episode, or double episode, or in German, Doppelfolge. We will start at FC St. Pauli, now in the German Bundesliga, at the club's museum, which has some very active researchers. And we'll end at Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, and the bigger question of what right remembering looks like in professional soccer today and what it can look like. We will take that journey with no less than 3 guests: Celina Albertz, a researcher and also in the curating team of the FC St. Pauli Museum; Sönke Goldbeck, the board chair and director of the museum; and Felipe Tobar, assistant professor in the Parks, Rec and Tourism Management Department at Clemson University in South Carolina, and the founder of the Football Studies YouTube channel. He's also the mastermind of a new documentary on public memory and football, which we will also talk about. If you want to know more about FC St. Pauli and what makes the club special, especially to this podcast, listen in to episode 26 from 2023 when I talked with 2 social workers that are employed by the club. Felipe has also been here before. He has talked about his work and research in episode 31 last February. So, what's the story here? The song The Heart of St. Pauli, Das Herz von St. Pauli, is sung by a raucous crowd before every St. Pauli home game. And the lyrics are pretty straightforward. The heart of St. Pauli, this is my home in Hamburg. That's where I'm at home. It's kind of a ritual of match day and the stadium experience at St. Pauli. Celina Albertz research has revealed that that song has a particular kind of history. The composer of the song, Mr. Jari, Michael Jari, was a successful German film pop composer. In the 30s, he was on the list of Joseph Goebbels' Gott begnadet list, a list of God's blessings. So artists and intellectuals that are kind of indispensable to the Nazi regime. Hans Albers, who is the first performer of that song, has a complicated relationship with the Nazi regime as well, distanced himself from it, but also took part in propaganda for it. And then there is Josef Ollig, who wrote the lyrics to that song. Ollig was a soldier in the Wehrmacht, turns out, and a war correspondent for Nazi propaganda as well. Today's episode is about an hour and is mostly concerned with the research on that song and the discussion that it has begun. The song is currently not played in the stadium. There's a pause on that while discussions are ongoing at St. Pauli. And that first part today mostly features Celina and Sönke, and also the actual song, about 11 minutes in. And part 2 comes out in 2 weeks then, and that funnels out from there to larger questions of soccer, research, and remembering, and features Felipe and also his movie project a bit more heavily. So here we go. We'll start in the heart of St. Pauli with Celina Albertz. Celina, thank you so much for the time to explain your research a little bit, what you did and what it led to. Could you first briefly share your football story? How did you come to do what you do now for FC St. Pauli?
I've been a fan of St. Pauli all my life, basically. I first went to the stadium with my dad and my sister as a kid. And I used to go every weekend until I moved away to study. First in Trier and then at the University of Cologne, where I did my master's degree. But I always planned on moving back to Hamburg long term. And when there was a job opening at the museum in 2020, I applied. And I've been working for the club ever since.
You are a researcher and part of the curatorial team there at the club museum. How big a part of your work are these research projects, where you take one aspect of the club's past or present and dig into the history and the history of reception a little bit?
Research is, of course, a big part of my work. And perhaps it's important to say this upfront. The museum was only founded in 2012. And before that, there wasn't even an archive. So most of the sources and documents we have now come from private collections and from former officials and players as well. And over the years, we have also collected many documents from archives all over Germany, really. But many sources were most likely destroyed during the Second World War. So the source situation is therefore not ideal, and large parts of the club's history, especially from the years before 1945, have not yet been very well researched. And we are trying to close these gaps, but it's a difficult process. It can be a very difficult process. And I came across the history surrounding the heart of St. Pauli, more or less by chance, while I've been researching for our monthly podcast. And this story really is, in some ways, it touches more the present than the club's direct history.
Yes, indeed. And questions of how to remember today. I wonder, this research began in part because of the harbor theme and the Miller and Tone podcast. Can you take us along on the detective journey a little bit? Like, how did you start it? And what did you encounter on this research trail? Walk us through this a little bit.
One of our listeners suggested that we do an episode about St. Pauli and the harbor. And we thought that was a good idea and an interesting topic. And so we did that. And our podcast concept is relatively straightforward. Each of us chooses a topic and researches it and then tells the others about it. And because of the many references to the harbor in the song The Heart of St. Pauli, I took a closer look at it for the podcast. And given the song's strong association with Hans Albers, at least in public perception, I began my research with his person. I took the classic research route, so to speak, and I went to the library and I read books about Hans Albers and his career and his life. And one book I read said that Hans Albers did not write or compose The Heart of St. Pauli, despite other claims, which is a bit of a complex story. I explained that in the podcast. But more importantly, the book also revealed that the lyrics were written by a journalist named Josef Oleg, who used the pen name Arno Gillo. And Gillo, by the way, is Oleg backwards. And I then went to the Hamburg State Archives and I looked at various documents relating to Oleg, including his denazification file. And there, of course, his work as a Nazi propagandist was mentioned. And I did further research in the Federal Archives and in the military archives. And of course, I also looked at his so-called war reports in various German newspapers.
What's the primary source situation like in this case? So you don't need to be in the humanities here. A primary source is not like a more important source, but the source closest to the date of the period or the question that we're researching. About how much was new to the discussion and where are these sources that you looked up? Not all in your museum, I suppose.
There are actually several books on post-war journalism in Germany that at least superficially discuss or mention Josef Oleg's career in National Socialism. However, his biography has never been the focus. And there has been no extensive research on his person. In general, there is a great continuity in the field of journalism in Germany because many journalists in the post-war years did not have clean biographies. Many had served, in fact, in Nazi propaganda. So Oleg is just one of many. And compared to other biographies, researching him is also relatively complicated because before his time in the Wehrmacht, he worked not for a newspaper, but in the press office of a company, Rhenania Ossak Mineralölwerke, which is now Shell Germany. And afterwards, he was in a special war correspondent unit for which very few documents have survived. So at the moment, I am traveling a lot to look through and evaluate the documents that exist.
How happy were you with how the debate went after your research came out, the ongoing debate?
I am, of course, following the debate with great interest. And overall, I find it relatively constructive. The fact that we are having this debate and that we are discussing the consequences, in my opinion, speaks well for the club and its supporters. Sometimes I would like to see a more positive attitude, though, because many fans react very emotionally and feel that something is being taken away from them, which is okay and understandable. But this debate is also a great opportunity, and it's debates like this that make the club what it is, in my opinion.
One relevant question for any historical research that sees the light of day is, who is the audience, right? So who are we doing this detective work, or are we doing this research for, and who gets to debate about it? So who do you think is yours in the museum and in your work? The club's members and academic fields, popular discourses on memory. Where do you position the conversations that you want to be a part of?
In my opinion, the challenge and the opportunity with this topic really is that many different people are interested for very different reasons. And as much as I'm happy about this as a researcher, there are, of course, challenges when it comes to communication. Next up, we will publish the scientific documentation, and then we will proceed to plan events and panels with the club and with our fan project. And we hope that we reach as many people as possible and that we can answer as many questions as possible.
That was Celina Albertz from the FC St. Pauli Museum. And now that we've already heard a little bit about this song, how about we actually listen into the song and what it sounds like? Here it is in two versions. First, the rocky version sung live at the Millantor Stadium of St. Pauli before a game recently, and then a older and more original version. So you get a little bit of that vibe as well.
Das Herz von St. Pauli, das ist meine Heimat. In Hamburg, da bin ich zu Haus. Der Hafen, die Lichter, die Sehnsucht begleiten das Schiff in die Ferne hinaus. Das Herz von St. Pauli, das ruft dich zurück, denn dort an der Elbe, da wartet dein Glück. Das Herz von St. Pauli, das ist meine Heimat. In Hamburg, da bin ich zu Hause.
So now you've heard it. I personally prefer the first one. Of course, the last one is Hans Albers, and that is the 1957 version. Albers, as you heard before, who did both propaganda for the Nazi regime while also distancing himself from it. The composer, Michael Jari, on that list of God's Blessing by Joseph Goebbels, and the lyricist, Josef Ollik, who was a soldier in the Wehrmacht and a war correspondent for Nazi propaganda during the war, and then became a song lyric writer. So now we've heard from Celina, who told us about the hands-on research. We've heard the song. Now let's ask, what does it mean, right? What do these kinds of discoveries specifically mean now in the context of St. Pauli, but also perhaps in a few others? And more generally, what does memory mean? What does museum work mean for a club? And what is the significance of that kind of work, especially in modern day soccer? And for that, we turn to Sönke and Felipe. Hello to Sönke in Hamburg and Felipe, South Carolina. And I'm sitting in springtime in the Midwest, and we're debating an issue that leads us fairly far back into the past, but certainly a little deeper into Hamburg. Before we get there, Sönke, you're the one of the two of you who is entirely new to the assistant professor of football. Do you want to briefly say what your football biography is, how the game and you connect, and how it leads to this conversation today?
Okay. So I basically started with go to football matches relatively late, coming from different sports like canoeing and handball and field hockey. And I started to go out to football matches with guys at school, actually to the main rival in Hamburg for the first couple of matches. Yeah, exactly. I've never been a big fan or anything, but it was good fun, having a couple of beers, when you're a teenager, and actually stopped going when, after 10 matches or so, when we went back into the town in a train carriage, and the whole car was singing. We built a U-Bahn, underground train from St. Pauli to Auschwitz. So some early things in football was already had a bit of political feelings, put it mildly. Then joined the only guy in my class, my school class, went to St. Pauli to go to the Milan tour, and was such a different atmosphere, much more friendly, much more open, and didn't need 10 beers to enjoy it. So 2 or 3 were enough. And
when was that?
That was 93.
Good. Yeah.
Roughly, it really is it wasn't such a big thing, with more like recreational thing, but it immediately felt all right and much better. And because, it was a little bit in punk rock and whatever. And I read sometimes more of the fanzines, and I read that I went and going to matches, but I slowly went to more and more matches until in the end of the 2000s, I was really sucked into it and loved it, and felt this was my club, became member of the club, got a season ticket and so on. And and it really is like a magnet, or you get sucked into it even more and more and more. And I also saw that by early 2000s, the club had given me so many good friends and things to do, and enjoyment, and also very sad things. Obviously, I want to give back and became more active. We call that an active supporter, and got more engaged in supporters' activities and the club.
So your biography, starting there in the early 90s, lines up a little bit with the transformation of the St. Pauli fan scene. That does have to do with some of the work we'll talk about today as well. Quite some transformations on the stands going on back then as well, when you joined.
Yes, but to be honest, some of the main things happened already, and the other things that the first. The basis for the change was maybe between 85 and 91.
Mm-hmm.
Then came the major change that actually developed from these groundwork that some people did. But to be honest, I was not directly part of it, because I was another next generation, let's call it, and only became really actively involved in this thing later. So I already could enjoy all the benefits, or some of the benefits, and but I was not really part of the first group of people, or second wave, third wave, call it this way.
Okay. And I'll plug it here again if you like to find out a little bit more what happened there in the 80s. Episode 26 from last year would be the one to listen to. 2 social workers from the club were the guests back then. Felipe, we've met you before.
Yes.
Briefly reintroduce yourself.
Well, first, pleasure to be here again, and more special to share the episode with Sönke to talk about FC St. Pauli and everything related. Curiously, I am very close to FC St. Pauli in direct ways, because I support Grêmio, and we beat Hasfal in 1983 World Club Championship in Tokyo. So since then, we have been somewhat related. Grew up as a Grêmio fan, grew up as a Grêmio fan, looking Ronaldinho Gaúcho and his talents. And of course, my biggest memory was Brazil 2002 World Cup champion in Japan. But of course, we saw a little bit of Romario in 1994. It was easy to be a football fan in Brazil in my childhood. And of course, with that, it's just an inspiration to try to be a football player and always be in the stands. But when you're not good enough, you go and study football and you do something else. So that's kind of a summary why I am here. I was as an academic working with football, but very, very inspired by one of the best here in Brazil that we still talk nowadays.
Fresh, well, not quite freshly anymore, but back from Europe, and what's more freshly off the press is your movie that we talked about a little bit last time, the match that not every club wants to play, and that's where I'd like us to be eventually headed. So there's broader questions about engaging the work of soccer and memory, which is what your documentary, it's a 35-minute long, is about. That's the one that you were in Europe for research, and this is where the contact between Sönke and you comes from as well. So lay this out here.
Exactly.
Sönke, you mentioned you became a more active supporter at the club, which leads us directly to the question that made headlines just a couple of weeks ago at St. Pauli. What's your active role right now at the club and in the museum and in the research department of St. Pauli?
Yeah, so basically I have a couple of different roles. So the one role is that I'm, like, say, the CEO of the museum, elected board member of the museum. And I was one of the people came out of the whole movement, or the whole attempt of the supporters to get their interest reflected when we rebuilt the stadium. And so I became part of a work group who worked for that. And one of the issues was that there was supposed to be a police station here in the stadium, and they would occupy the same space that was the last place where we could put a museum in. So basically, I started fighting for getting a museum in instead of the police station, together with other people. And we were quite successful, but then had to prove that we actually can do a museum. And so that's how I became involved in building a museum. And so I'm basically in the role of organizing all of things, funding them, all the basic running of the whole thing, and trying to set up the projects and have some, build them successfully. So by now we are like a entity with like 1.2 million euro in turnover every year, and we have a educational program that we started in 2018. We have different exhibitions. By now we also have a permanent exhibition, and we exist for 12 years now. And as an association, it's an own non-profit charitable association, and we are the official museum of the FC St. Pauli, but we can do stuff on our own terms, basically get some funding from them, but have to also get a lot of funding from other sources and from our activities. And so what we also built with the time is more capacity in the area of research and the whole archive thing and so on, and to be actually able to do these things.
How problematic is the Heart of St. Pauli is the title of a podcast episode from the St. Pauli related podcast Miller and Tone back in February. It leads us back to some of the work done in the museum and by museum staff at St. Pauli about a legendary, it's not an official club anthem, but it's a song that's played before every match. Do you want to explain a little bit? I have the lyrics here in English. It's fairly, standard fare. It's a sailor song. It's an old sailor song. The heart from St. Pauli, that's my home. In Hamburg, there I'm at home. The lights are calling me back and yearning for it. Da-da-da-da-da. So it's that's what it is. And been sung before home games since, do you know since when?
That's roughly 2002.
Okay. I mean, that's not like You'll Never Walk Alone at Liverpool, but, it's a decent chunk of tradition and it's a beloved song, right?
Yeah, well, we actually sang the You'll Never Walk Alone in the stadium for ages.
Uh-huh.
We had a bit of punk rock version that was being played for the matches, and I think we were one of the first to play it in Germany. And because there were also connections to clubs in England and Scotland that used that anthem or that song.
Right.
And
there's also Hell Spells, by the way, that has a role at St. Pauli. That's also not the song we're talking about. We're talking about
exactly. And so before You'll Never Walk Alone, we had, I think, Wagner or something, some classical stuff that was being played, and people said, okay, that's that guy has a pass as well, or let's say not Nazi but nationalist, anti-Semitic stuff, so then basically people chose Walk Alone because they found it nice, and there was some punk rock band playing a relatively simple version of that. At some point, it was like, okay, we had it quite a while, and someone at the club had the idea to have some other musician play Walk Alone, different version. Everybody was, or many supporters were against that, and then was huge discussions what to do, and then one of the options was Das Herz von St. Pauli, and first it was people said, okay, no, we don't want that, and then at some point it was used then anyway, and also in a rock version, punk rock version.
Yeah, it's not the original kitschy schmaltzy version. It's the
exactly. It's a bit more rocky, and So I would say the first 10 years or so, nobody was really that much interested in the song. It was being played, it was okay, it was nothing bad or so. And in the recent, let's say 10 years, 12 years, it became a bit bigger. Because, for example, other people covered it, or for example, Pantheon Rococó incorporated it into a medley of songs they did, and things or so. And the Ultra started to hold up the scarves when the song was being played, and the music. And at some point, the music was faded out at the end, as you know it from the You'll Never Walk Alone. Sometimes the stadium could sing alone, and it was always quite nice as an atmospheric thing or so. And the lyrics themselves are relatively harmless. But there's a bit more complication to that. We can come into that because, what's actually, so that was the situation where we were, let's say, a couple of months ago.
Yeah. Then came the research, which Celina has shared with us. And then the question, what do you do with it? Who first asked that question? Like, was it immediately obvious to you after some of the research findings came out that this is a bigger question? Did you connect to the club? Do you just put it out and see what happens? How does this kind of discourse get started at St. Pauli?
Well, the original thing is that we have this podcast done by 4 people at the museum. That's Celina, Christopher, Thomas, and Christoph. And for that one, the request of a listener to the podcast, as a museum podcast, was a topic of harbor, to do something on the theme of harbor-related stories about the history of FC St. Pauli. So Celina had a look into the song without, as far as I know, thinking not much of it. I mean, it's like, okay, it has a topic of the harbor in it. So did some research on that. And then, so some coincidences, found out that there's a problematic part about the author of the lyrics. So that was being put out. It's not a big secret, but also not widely published beforehand. So then it was released. And the Millantor podcast, that's a different podcast, and also, let's say, a blogging website that's very popular among the Pauli supporters. They immediately wanted to have some quotes and were then publishing it more widely. And that's when actually many people got aware of it and the discussion started.
The club eventually made a statement themselves in the person of President Oke Göttlich. This song, as of now, isn't being played, while there are conversations about how to handle this in the future.
I don't quite know where you stood or stand in this. I'm, of course, assuming you know, but could you list a few of the reasons why you think the club made that decision now?
Well, it was not just the club. The club did it in a very, let's say, democratic way. We have an established communication channel between club and supporters. Der ständige Fanausschuss, der ständige Fanausschuss, Standing Council of Supporters.
Yeah, it's kind of a fan advisory board.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and in England is Mm-hmm.
So basically there was a discussion being held on that, because the museum is doing research, we're doing scientific stuff, we don't judge. We can provide background information, we can provide context, we can provide facts. We wouldn't decide what would be being played in the stadium. So basically there was a discussion among supporters, club, and so on, and the decision was being made. It would be a good idea to widen up the research, to do even more research, because there was a proper research by Celina that was absolutely by all journalistic or scientific standards. It was a absolutely deep and thorough analysis.
Yes.
But if it's that's the difference. If suddenly so many people show an interest in something, and there are so many points being raised that have more wider meaning or more complicated context. For example, how much relevance is in certain things or so, then it makes sense to go deeper into it and also to do a written statement or a written work and not just a podcast.
So right now the museum isn't weighing in. The museum is providing more material. I'm assuming this is mostly about the guy who wrote the lyrics, Mr. Oleg. There are questions about the interpreter and the composer as well, but particularly about the past of Oleg, as we've heard from Celina. The statement of the club was interesting, I thought, because at the end of this first stage of discourse, what I heard your president say is that there's a lot of division around this, and if it's the case that not everybody in the stadium can sing this together anymore, it doesn't make sense as a stadium anthem. Could you quickly give us the arguments of at least the two sides involved in this, even if as a museum staff, you're not personally trying to tip the scales here, but...
Obviously, many people like the song, and it's always, many people always like to have to know things about history and so on, as long as it doesn't affect themselves and their own comfort zone. So I guess some people were hit where it hurts a bit. Like you want to have the song at the beginning of the match, and there is the open, let's say, philosophical question of until what point is it still the work of the author, and at what point is it your own thing? How much meaning is being put into such a work of art that had a different meaning when it was released, and now some people put more meaning into it or other meaning into it. Is it really that important who the author was? Yep. So that's a debate.
It's a very good postmodern textual analysis you just performed there. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like Morrissey. He might be a right-wing asshole, but he has written some brilliant songs. So
I will not put links to Morrissey in the show notes.
Yeah. But this
parallels.
Is a good question. It's also, then again, you can argue. It's different if you listen to that song or like it or sing it even yourself. We had questions from a band that, we, now emails, we are a band from here and there, and we always play the song and as part of our set. It's like, who are we to judge? Make up your own mind, and no one would call you Nazi if you play the song. But is it the right song to sing at the start of a match at a stadium whose supporters is basically a symbol almost for anti-fascist, anti-racist activities in football? So these are open questions, and everybody will answer them a little bit different. So saying, okay, we want to, we need something that unites everyone. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense. And that's what Oke said. And I think that's what's now a good basis for looking further into it and having meaningful debate about certain things. We also have to be, it's also that we can't decide on make an online vote or something like that. That's not how, like how things work. There's a petition out there right now, and it doesn't have many followers there right now.
Is the petition to keep the song?
Yeah, well, actually, it's about having a vote on that, but it's a bit of, but we have democratic standards here, like we have an AGM where people can voice opinions and make decisions. We also have.
Would you really discuss the match day program? Because that's eventually what it comes to at an AGM, or is there a different forum for it?
We are a membership based club, so every member has one vote. So as long as you pay your membership fees, you're a member of the club, and you're allowed to vote, and you can also put forward motions, and certain criteria are matched. You can also stand for election and so on. Yes, if someone wants to put that forward, then that could happen. But otherwise, we wouldn't discuss it there. It's really, if someone is putting it forward, then it will be discussed. If that makes sense, it's a different question. The other thing is that we have a representative democracy. We elect people to handle things, and we have established structures to discuss these things, like these counseling. This council of supporters, for example, is even put into the licensing agreements with the German Football League and so on. So it's not like just something set up. This exists much longer than the licensing thing, but we have an official thing there, and it's good that they discuss it. And
these are the rules of professional football in Germany. This is not.
So that's that. So basically, we have a discussion. We have different opinions. It's also that sometimes you can question how many people are really have a certain opinion and how loud they are.
Yes, as in any such setting. Let me get Felipe in here briefly. Maybe not so briefly. How unique you think St. Pauli is with this kind of debate? You've visited various clubs across Europe in search of how they're dealing with memory in public ways, particularly their memory of Europe's 1930s and 40s and the heydays of fascism. Where does this St. Pauli debate fit in your opinion?
Well, first, I think it's important to mention that it's not the first time in history of the club that the fan base and the board of directors, they have to deal with the past, particularly the National Socialist past. If you get back to 1998, they had a huge discussion at the HM, where now it's the platform, continues to be the platform, democratic platform to decide how to deal with the past. In that moment in time, they changed the name of the stadium from Willem Koch to Millertorn after one of the fans discovered the Nazi membership of the former president. Mm-hmm. And then they continue doing this culture of remembrance exercise that involves most of the times independent research, which has been a feature not only from St. Pauli, but other fan bases in Germany. This commitment to really understand the past of the club. And with that, can bring changes in the club's traditions, and even the club identity, right? Because you start to renaming your stadium, you're starting to take out badge of honors from former directors, like was the case with Otto Wolff, a former vice president of St. Pauli, that was the club found, well, the research done by the museum found out that he was one of the top Nazis in Hamburg and even sent people to concentration camps. So That was in 2011. They also have an interesting discussion in this cultural remembrance that Sönke did not mention, but I think it's somewhat similar to the song, which is the memorial for the German fallen soldiers of the First and Second World Wars that is really a place in between the two memorials that the Van Laden and the club have created to honor the victims of National Socialism. So there's a lot going on in FC São Paulo, and this particular debate around the song is one more episode in these long-term discussions on how can we deal with this past. And I think FC São Paulo is one of the exceptions across the world, across the clubs that I have visited, which is in some sense a reflection of what specific groups in German tries to deal with this past. So FC São Paulo does not hide from this fight of dealing with the past, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. And they really do not marginalize those topics. Instead, they bring to the attention of the fans and allow them to have an open discussion, an open floor of discussions to come up with the terms of how to reinterpret this difficult past. So it, as I said, is a continuous exercise of cultural remembrance. And with the investments in research, as Sönke mentioned, we might find other cases to be discussing in the near future, FC São Paulo, as well as in other German football clubs in the next few decades.
Yeah. Sönke, the work of the museum, of course, extends well beyond these isolated incidents. In Felipe's documentary, actually, you said a very important sentence. And it was something like, people think that Nazis somehow descended as aliens upon Germany in those years, and then woof, they were gone again. But no, these were real people with real lives who continued their lives and who often tried hard to fade into obscurity afterwards. So the years of Nazi dictatorship are not, it's not that one exceptional era that you have to deal with and the rest is fine. It strikes me that the museum has a much longer view on what fascism and anti-fascism and politics and football means. How do you display that in the museum? How do you communicate these questions to the visitor?
Well, we are still working on that, obviously, because that's like they say, you never stop working on these things. Also, we had when we were in the phase where we didn't have a permanent exhibition, but just temporary exhibitions. We did already one that used the full space to make to create an exhibition that you actually can still see as a 3D scan online, also translated to English, about FC São Paulo in the Nazi time, where we were based on a book, work of Gregor Backes, another historian who made the, let's say, groundbreaking work on that episode of the club's history. And so we extended that by also some more information about what happened afterwards and put it into context with the modern time. So we try to show that the, let's say, call it the anti-fascist club as it's today, is not something that just happened, was like that always, or that happened from nowhere, but that it was fought for, and that we have a past that is basically very similar to many other clubs. It's not particularly worse and it's not better than that. So that was the first time we dived into that after, we were only founded in 2012, 2013. So, the association existed in 2012. The first temporary exhibition was in 2014. And then after we, then at that time, it was just a raw building without, right in the stand. And we first had to, after the first exhibition, it was still like in a construction site, then we had to build proper rooms. And then the first major exhibition was actually that topic, because that, okay, this is really one important thing of that. And afterwards, and while late, we started the educational program. And then at some point we thought, okay, we know that the early past of the club is hardly researched. And we thought we had no knowledge of a single Jewish football player. And that was something that just couldn't be. There couldn't be no Jewish football players at FC St. Pauli. We are in a district where historically there's a lot of Jewish population. And
yes. And the club is founded in 1910.
Official founding date is 1910.
Yep.
But the actual roots of the club are 1862. Or if you go back even further, if you go do it same as some other football clubs do it with all these different unions of different clubs and so on, mergers with different clubs, you could go even back to 1852.
And in all those years, you said you couldn't find a single Jewish footballer.
No one was known, before we started then another phase of research. We knew about 2 rugby players, and they are commemorated at the outside the stadium, and they actually were instrumental in founding the rugby division in in 1932, 33, but we didn't have knowledge of any football players. So, and from 2022 on, we started to systematically research the early days with a special look at were there any Jewish people, were there other people who were persecuted later, and so on. And that is a really huge project. I think we identified some 2,000 members of the club, of which 200 were Jewish, as far as we could tell from certain indicators. And also I think 80 we were persecuted. So that's a huge number of people. And we also started to research full biographies. So a while ago, we started a special exhibition on Max Kulik and also put out a catalog, also available online as a PDF in German and English. And so that's where really the ball got rolling in 2023. And now we dive much deeper into the whole thing. So right now we can still find a special exhibition on Max Kulik. Right now we have a special exhibition about the biographies of different St. Pauli players St. Pauli people are members of St. Pauli from the Second World War, that from Nazi time, from which we put from the 2017 exhibition, and so while we're now also changing the standing exhibition, the permanent exhibition, we will have a part where all the new research is being put in one thing as well to proper communicate that,
and also part about how the club came to deal with what it came to know over time, right?
As Felipe mentioned, that at some point people found out that 1997, that the former president, after which the stadium had been named, was in a Nazi party and so on. These were all transformations, basically. The whole research that we do today basically became possible because of what how other people changed the club to become much more aware of the whole thing. Because all the generations after Second World War, they're basically covering up the thing. They were not interested in talking about the negative sides.
This wouldn't be unique to St. Pauli. I mean, this is
no, absolutely not. We were totally normal
post-war and post-trauma. Yeah.
Let's say we were really absolutely normal standard club until the middle of the 80s, when this new influence of supporters came in that had a different political mind.
A normal club, often encounters, or sometimes lives by this phrase that football isn't supposed to be political. This is supposed to bring different sides together. I think all three of us here would agree that that's nonsense. But do you still encounter those voices in your work at the museum, in the discourse, for example, about that song, or Felipe? Did you encounter these kinds of comments as well in your tour of Europe? Either one of you.
Sönke, go first.
Yeah, well, partly because where we are is basically, let's say, a bubble. So even those people who might not share those people who voice their opinions. might now have a bit of a problem or when it's about something that's in their comfort zone. But generally, it's the accepted standard at the FC St. Pauli that there is certain kind of politics. So
you would say even for the folks that would like to keep the song, for example, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't
even
say
their argument isn't, come on, let's be unpolitical. We can sing whatever. That's not where they're coming from, correct?
Well, I think there's a question of the definition of politics, so basically, our view of the majority of the supporters scene or the members of the club would be that you can't be unpolitical. Everything contains politics. And
the second nice Foucault reference you're sliding in today, yes? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's like, it's like that. Yeah. It's not that if people are against discrimination that they bring politics into stadium. It started with people chanting racist shit against, let's say, black players or so.
Well, yeah, or in this particular case, Mr. Olig was political before any one of you in the museum ever brought politics into the club, right?
Yeah. I mean, he worked for a couple of years before, even before the Nazis took power, for a very, let's say, right-wing conservative newspaper in Hamburg. So
that paved the way in many ways as a media voice for the Nazis.
So that was before the Nazis came there. So the Nazis were there, but they were not in power. So he had a choice. You could work for different people, and that choice before there was a dictatorship and so on, And this whole story, for example, of that club president, Willem Koch, is far more difficult because at that time, obviously, the head of the club, the leader of the club, had to be a member of the party. And he was getting along very well with the Nazis. But he also seemed to have a decent relationship with the Jewish owner of the shop he took over. So it's a complicated story, but it's enough to say, okay, he was for a club like us to say the stadium should not be named after someone who was a Nazi party and who worked together and did not who covered up basically the whole issue of having top Nazis among their own players and people.
And I think those stories of you getting along with the shopkeeper are important in the work of memory because they emphasize that we're talking about something deeply human here. As you said in Felipe's movie, these aren't aliens that drop down into Germany. This could happen again because humans still exist, right? So you need to engage this with nuance and with go ahead.
Sorry, that's that. It happens right now. If anybody had the question of how could it happen, they just get the answer. Even if in the end, hopefully, we will not see something like that again. We're just getting the perfect example of how these things happen. And that's, I think, why it's important to have this research and to show people the similarities between what happened back in the day and what's happening now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, we're talking about regular human beings and a club made up of regular human beings.
And on that hell of a cliffhanger, we will leave it for part 1 of our journey into the history and the heart of St. Pauli, but also into the present and the future of this club and of public memory in soccer more broadly as well. Part 2 comes out in 2 weeks, and when you listen to that part 2, I might actually be in Hamburg. I'm about to head out to Europe as I record this, be in Sweden with my daughters and for some research and for some projects that might include an interview as well, and then head down to where my sister lives in northern Germany, very close to Hamburg. So good chance that I'll stop by once the second part of this story hits the airwaves, which is 2 weeks from now. Until then, be well and think good thoughts.
Ich kann den ganzen Tag nur noch schreien, aber nein.